She was never meant to be anything more than a punchline, just a shy, awkward girl thrust onto a stage by two struggling twin sisters, meant to be the joke everyone laughed at. But when her voice finally broke the silence, the entire room hushed, and a quiet, worn-down single father's life shifted forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable story of music, healing, and second chances, make sure you subscribe. Stories like this don't come around often. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to change everything. Now, let me tell you what truly happened. That year, the snow came early across the sprawling plains of Wyoming. By mid-November, the wind had already dusted the cracked highways and barren fields in white, and the skeletal trees stretched their bare limbs, aching silently for the thaw of spring. Ethan Graves gripped the wheel of his battered old Chevy, his knuckles white despite the numb cold creeping into the cab. The wipers slapped weakly against icy sleet, and the heater coughed out inconsistent bursts of warmth, much like everything else in his life these days. He'd driven this same lonely route countless times, hauling lumber from the mill back to his weathered cabin, nestled just beyond the edge of Cedar Ridge. But today, something felt different. There was a stillness so deep it seemed as if the road itself was holding its breath. Just past a bend near an abandoned rail yard, Ethan's eyes caught on a rusted shipping container. Its heavy doors hung half open, creaking softly as the wind nudged them. At first he almost kept going, dismissing it like he had countless times before. Then, a sudden flash of movement, a small frantic hand beating against the cold metal. Ethan slammed on the brakes. Gravel skittered under the tires as the truck fishtailed, then stopped. Without a second thought, he flung open the door and bolted through the knee-deep snow. The biting wind cut through his coat, but he barely noticed. Reaching the container, he heard faint whimpers. No, not singing, but a cracked, trembling hum, like a lullaby remembered only in moments of fear and hope. His breath caught as he yanked the door fully open. Inside, huddled against a stained blanket, were two girls, twins, no older than 10. Their cheeks were raw and rosy from the cold, lips trembling. One looked up at him with wide, unafraid eyes. The other clutched a crumpled paper snowflake, torn and damp. "Please," the first whispered, voice barely more than a breath, "don't tell them we're here." Ethan didn't ask questions. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around them both. "We need to get you warm. Come on." They hesitated. One asked, "Are you going to call someone?" "I might," Ethan said honestly, gently lifting the lighter one into his arms. "But right now I'm going to save your lives." Back at the cabin, the wood stove roared, filling the room with a crackling warmth that began to chase away the chill. Ethan placed mugs of steaming cocoa on the table. The girls, now dressed in dry clothes, huddled close beneath a patchwork quilt. "What are your names?" he asked softly. The bolder twin spoke first. "I'm Tessa." The quieter one who had clung to the snowflake nodded. "And I'm Wren. We're 9 3/4, she said with a shy smile. Ethan smiled faintly. "That's pretty exact." "Our mom always said numbers matter," Wren added, looking down. "Where is she now?" Ethan asked gently. Wren's gaze dropped further. "She left. Aunt Carla was supposed to take care of us, but she said if we cried one more time, she'd leave us in the woods." A cold knot tightened in Ethan's chest. The past had a cruel way of circling back. He'd heard too many stories like this, some with hope, many ending in heartbreak. He rose and walked down the hall, lightly knocking on a bedroom door. "Maggie? You okay in there?" No answer. There rarely was. Maggie hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. Not since that day when she'd fainted on stage during her middle school recital. The cruel teasing, the whispers, the piercing spotlight had broken something inside her. Diagnosed with selective mutism, she became a ghost in her own home, communicating only through glances and gestures. Ethan, perhaps naively, hoped that bringing these girls into the house, even just for a night, might stir something in her. He didn't expect miracles, only a flicker, a sign of light. Back in the living room, Tessa hummed softly as she sipped her cocoa. The melody was aimless, fragile, yet oddly soothing. Wren closed her eyes and joined in, two small imperfect voices weaving together like an old harmony reunited after years apart. From down the hall, the bedroom door creaked open. Maggie appeared barefoot, wearing an oversized flannel shirt, eyes fixed on the twins. She didn't speak, but she listened. Ethan froze, watching his daughter with a quiet awe. She hadn't looked at a stranger in months. Now she stood still, eyes shimmering with something, memory, longing, or maybe the faint stirrings of hope. Tessa smiled warmly. "Hi, you can sit with us if you want." Maggie hesitated, then leaned against the doorframe, tilting her head as if recalling a song she hadn't dared to sing. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep on the pull-out couch, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen. An untouched cup of coffee steamed beside him. The air smelled of old pine and cinnamon toast. Across the room, a wooden box rested on the shelf, an old recording device with a built-in microphone, the kind songwriters used long ago. Inside were the last recordings Ethan's late wife had made with Maggie before she passed. Lullabies, giggles, whispered harmonies. They hadn't been played in 2 years, much like the piano gathering dust in the corner, and much like the man who once believed music could save people. But something about Tessa and Wren reminded Ethan of those days, the raw simplicity of melody, the quiet power of unpolished voices. He reached for the box. For the first time in years, he opened it. Morning came quietly, spilling pale grey light through frost-laced windows. The wooden floors creaked softly in the cold. Ethan stirred awake, his hand reaching instinctively for the coffee pot. He didn't say much, not even to himself. The silence had long since become part of the walls. But today there were 3 extra breaths filling the stillness. The twins were still asleep on the couch, their arms tangled like vines rooted in the same soil. Ethan watched them for a long moment before lighting the stove. The flames crackled, warming the room, and something shifted inside him. Soft, unfamiliar, like a guitar string struck after years of neglect, but still singing true. He didn't want to name it. He simply let it be. Maggie was already seated at the kitchen table when he returned, 2 chipped mugs of cocoa in hand. She never made a sound entering the room, never had. Sitting with her back straight and hands folded, she stared silently at the curling steam above her cup. She didn't touch it. Her long dark hair framed her face like a curtain, masking the words she no longer spoke. Ethan sat across from her and waited. This was their dance. He offered a gift of presence, and on rare occasions she returned it. "You okay with them staying a while?" he asked quietly. Maggie said nothing, but her fingers curled around the cup. That was her yes. "Good," he nodded. "I think they need it. Maybe we do too." For a fleeting second, Maggie looked up, just long enough for Ethan to glimpse the spark in her eyes, the same eyes that once glittered when her mother sang to her on their back porch, long before the silence settled. Later that morning, Tessa and Wren woke groggy but smiling. They set the table without being asked, laughing over a toaster that only toasted one side of the bread. Maggie lingered in the hallway, half hidden by the doorframe, still a shadow in her own home. "Lyra?" "No, Tessa," spotted her. "We saved you the red plate. It's the only one with no chips." Maggie hesitated, then stepped forward and sat at the table. Ethan held his breath. 3 girls, 1 table, no word spoken, but something far deeper. Laughter, breath, belonging. Outside, snow continued to fall. School was cancelled, roads empty, but inside, for once, the house was alive. Ethan pulled out a box of old board games and let the girls argue over rules no one quite remembered. Maggie didn't speak, but when Tessa accidentally knocked over the Monopoly bank, Maggie was the one who knelt down to help rebuild it. The smile they shared could have warmed the coldest hearth twice over. After dinner, the twins hummed again, low and casual, the kind of tune children invent when they feel safe. Maggie stood nearby watching. Something in her posture softened, her shoulders relaxed, her head tilted slightly, like a flower turning toward light. Then it happened. A single note escaped her lips, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. Ethan froze mid-step in the kitchen. He turned toward her, but said nothing. Tessa's eyes widened. "You're singing," she whispered gently. Maggie blinked and bolted. Ethan found her curled up in the back seat of their old station wagon in the garage. The cold didn't seem to touch her. Her breath formed tiny clouds, arms wrapped tight around her knees. He didn't open the door right away. He stood silently, hand on the frosted handle. "I heard you," he said finally. "It was beautiful. You don't have to be afraid of your own voice. Not here." A pause. "I wasn't afraid," Maggie whispered, barely more than air. "I forgot that I could." They sat together in the cold for a long while. No words, no pressure, just shared stillness. A kind of truth that needs no translation. Ethan remembered how he'd once believed music would save her. some magical song to make everything right. But now he understood. It wasn't music that saved people. It was simply being heard. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Ethan climbed to the attic and brought down an old guitar case. Dust puffed as he opened it, revealing the honey-coloured wood worn smooth by time and love. Maggie stood in the doorway, eyes wide. She said nothing but took 2 slow steps forward. "You remember this?" he asked softly. She nodded. Ethan sat down and began tuning the strings reverently. The wood creaked beneath his fingers, but the sound that came when he strummed was warm, full, alive. "I'm thinking maybe we can try again," he said. Maggie stepped closer. "Not for a performance," Ethan added gently. "Not for anyone else. Just for us." She looked down then, trusting the strings more than her voice, whispered, "Okay." As the fire dwindled to a bed of quiet embers, Sawyer gently cradled his guitar and let his fingers find the first tender chords of an old lullaby. It was one Maisie's mother used to hum when the nights stretched too long, too heavy with silence. The melody drifted through the room, delicate as a feather in still air. Maisie, seated nearby with her knees drawn close to her chest, listened. And then, quiet as snowfall, she began to hum. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was real. From the hallway, Junie and Lyra crept back in, drawn by the familiar thread of sound like moths to flame. One by one, their voices joined, soft and untrained, but full of something deeper than precision. Something like truth. 4 voices, 1 guitar, no script, no warning, just a moment so pure it felt sacred. The silence wasn't broken, it was transformed. In the warm hush that followed, the house itself seemed to inhale, awed, grateful, as if it had been waiting, aching for that sound to return. Not the sterile hush of unsaid words, but a golden stillness, warm as candlelight and just as fragile. Sawyer sat frozen, his hands still gently resting on the strings. Across from him, Maisie kept her head lowered, but her humming didn't stop. It threaded on, quiet and steady, as though each note was slowly stitching her back into the world she had once retreated from. Junie and Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes closed, gently swaying, absorbing each vibration as if it were medicine. And Sawyer, once a man stranded in the ruins of a life he barely recognized, felt something shift. He no longer felt like a broken man clinging to memories. In that moment, he felt like someone building something new. The days that followed unfolded with the slow sweetness of snow melting beneath a reluctant winter sun. The roads were still too slick for buses, and so the girls stayed at the cabin. Mornings became filled with the soft steam of oatmeal bowls, the shuffle of card games, and laughter that came easier each day. Afternoons brought snowmen with crooked smiles and sledding down the hill behind the woodshed, screams of joy echoing like bells. But it was the evenings. Oh, the evenings, when the magic returned. Each night, as the light dimmed and the fire crackled back to life, the girls gravitated toward the piano or guitar. They never called it practice. They didn't call it anything. They just sang. Sometimes it was an old hymn, sometimes a silly tune with nonsense words and harmonies that made sense only to them. And Maisie, God bless that girl, Maisie sang. She didn't say much during the day. She still kept her gaze averted from strangers. But when music began, something in her bloomed, like spring breaking through frozen ground. Sawyer never interrupted. He just quietly clicked the recorder on each night, setting it discreetly on the mantel. He wasn't recording for glory or nostalgia. It was for safekeeping. Like capturing fireflies in a jar, proof that the light had really happened. One Thursday evening, as Sawyer tuned his guitar, Junie looked up from her sketchpad with a gleam in her eye. "Do you think we could sing at the talent show?" Lyra snapped her head up, startled. "You mean like at school? On stage?" "Yeah," Junie replied, as if it was the most natural idea in the world. "We've got 3 songs now. That one Maisie started the other night, that one's really good." Maisie's fingers tightened around her cocoa mug, her lips pressed into a thin, uncertain line. Sawyer set his guitar down slowly. "I'm not sure that's a great idea," he said carefully. "Why not?" Junie challenged. "We're not scared." Sawyer looked at them, 3 brave girls, raw and radiant, full of hope that hadn't yet been bruised. And that was the problem. He knew the world. Knew how it cracked fragile things. "Because school talent shows can be tricky," he said, his voice weighed down with caution. "People laugh when they don't understand something beautiful. And that kind of laugh, it cuts deeper than silence." Maisie nodded faintly. She knew that laugh. She'd heard it more than once, but Junie didn't back down. Then maybe it's time someone gave them something they had to understand. The next morning, the wind bit sharp at Sawyer's cheeks as he walked to the mailbox. There, pinned to the community bulletin board, fluttered a flyer. Winter Talent Showcase, one night only, open to all students and families. Registration deadline, Friday. He stood there for a long time, the flyer flapping like it was a tiny article, easy to miss, wedged between the notice for the church bake sale and a blurb about pothole repairs on Main Street. Most people probably skimmed right past it. But for Sawyer, it was everything. He clipped it out, not with pride, but with reverence. Then he pinned it above the kitchen sink like a sacred relic. Not to show off, but to remind himself that something pure had happened. And for once, the world hadn't looked away. The following week unravelled in ways Sawyer hadn't imagined. More attention poured in than anyone could have predicted. One afternoon, as the late winter wind swept down from the hills and rattled the window panes of the cabin, Ellis Warren showed up at the door. She was the local school's music teacher, someone Sawyer had known once, long ago, back when life was simpler and his heart hadn't yet been worn thin by the weight of too many goodbyes. Ellis knocked softly, cheeks flushed from the cold, but eyes glowing with something tender. In her gloved hands was a folded flyer and a handwritten thank you card. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, stepping into the warmth of the cabin. Her voice was careful, like she already knew the tightrope she was asking him to walk. "Would the girls consider submitting a performance for the district showcase in Lincoln next month?" She handed over the flyer as if it might crumble from the weight of its own implications. "It's juried," she added. "Real stage, real audience, scouts from community arts centres. It's a chance, Sawyer." He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the living room. Junie and Lyra were sprawled across the braided rug, textbooks open and pencils dancing. Little Maisie, the quietest of them all, was nestled on the couch, lost in the margins of her music notebook, sketching tiny notes and stars and the shapes of songs not yet born. "Do they know you're asking?" Sawyer asked quietly. Ellis shook her head, a small smile on her lips. "Not yet. I thought I'd talk to you first." He nodded, rubbing a thumb across the edge of the flyer. "I'll ask them," he promised, but deep in his chest something tightened. Fear, not for himself, but for them. What had happened at the talent show had been a miracle, raw and fragile. It had unfolded like a blossom no one dared touch, and now came something bigger. Public. Riskier. Sawyer had seen what public attention could do to young, tender talent. It could lift them up like helium balloons, or carve them hollow from the inside. And he'd already lost too much to stand by and watch that happen again. That night, after the dinner plates were washed and the wind had settled into the silence of the pines, Sawyer gathered the girls at the kitchen table. He unfolded the flyer slowly and placed it in the centre like a delicate question. Maisie's fingers traced the bold letters at the top. "Voices of Tomorrow, State Youth Arts Showcase." Junie leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "So, we'd be competing?" "Not exactly," Sawyer replied. "It's more like being featured, a chance to be seen, maybe even helped." "By people who can judge," Maisie whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The room stilled. Sawyer looked at her, heart aching at the quiet weight in her voice. She wasn't afraid, just cautious. The kind of caution born from knowing what it's like to be unseen, to be the quiet one in a world that only claps for those who shout. "You don't have to," Sawyer said gently. "What you did last week, it was already more than enough. For anyone." Maisie didn't speak right away. Then, in a voice that barely broke the hush of the room, she said, "But what if there's a girl out there like me, and she's waiting for someone to sing first?" A hush followed. Then Junie, without a word, reached across the table and held her sister's hand. Sawyer let out a slow breath. "Then," he said, "we'd better give her a song worth hearing." From that moment on, the girls poured everything they had into the music. They picked a piece that braided Maisie's gentle notes with Junie's bright clarity and Lyra's steady, soulful tone. Sawyer helped arrange the harmonies, adding guitar rhythms that rose and fell like waves, carrying the emotion beneath their voices. They rehearsed in the garage most nights. Somehow, among the smell of old motor oil and rusted tools, the acoustics were perfect. Junie had christened it the Echo Room. Maisie started keeping a journal, filling its pages with lyrics, dreams, and fragile melodies. She didn't share them yet, but she carried it everywhere, tucked into her coat like a treasure too sacred to reveal. Everything was coming together, until the letter came. It was sealed in a heavy envelope from the superintendent's office, addressed directly to Sawyer. He read it once, then again, and something cold settled into his bones. Dear Mr. Whitlock, after reviewing district policy and receiving multiple parent concerns regarding last week's talent show performance, the school board has determined that non-enrolled students are not eligible to perform at district events. As such, the trio act featuring your daughter Maisie and students Junie and Lyra Carpenter does not meet the criteria for submission. Sincerely, Brenda M. Ellsworth, Director of Youth Arts Participation. Sawyer sat at the kitchen table, the letter slipping from his fingers like ash. He didn't tell the girls, not that night. He couldn't. Later, when the cabin had gone quiet, he called Ellis. She knew, he said flatly. This Brenda woman, someone gave her the language to shut us out. I'm sorry, Sawyer, Ellis whispered. I didn't see this coming. I did, he said bitterly. That's the problem. I've seen how fast people turn when something real starts to shine. There was a pause. You're not going to let this stop them, are you? Sawyer's eyes drifted to the recorder on the mantel. No, he said, but I need to be smart. We fight this our way. The next day, he sat the girls down, read them the letter, word for cruel word. Maisie didn't cry. Junie did, quietly. Lyra clenched her fists. So that's it? We just disappear again? No, Sawyer said. We record it anyway. We send it. If they throw it out, that's on them. But they're going to hear it. He turned to Maisie. And if you want to write something new, something that says what you need them to hear, now's the time. She looked up, eyes clear. Then she rose, went to her room and returned with her notebook. She set it gently on the table. On the first page, in careful looping letters, it read, A Song for the Silent. The melody started soft, tentative, like footsteps on ice. But note by note, it grew. Sawyer sat beside her on the living room floor, guitar in his lap, watching as she turned whispers into sound. Junie and Lyra curled up on the sofa, still as stones, listening with the reverence only children possess when they know they're witnessing something sacred. A song for the ones who don't speak loud, Maisie sang, but carry thunder in their hearts. Her voice quivered on thunder, but she didn't stop. Sawyer followed her lead in a minor key, gentle, unobtrusive. He knew better than to interfere with a song still being born. By midweek, the cabin had transformed. The kitchen echoed with vocal warm-ups. The hallway became a choreography path. The garage, now lined with blankets for sound, became a recording studio. Sawyer set up his old condenser mic and vintage laptop. They rehearsed late into the night. Then the piano broke. It was the night before their final take. Maisie was playing the intro, her fingers fluid and sure, until a sudden clack. The middle C fell silent. She tried again. Dead note. Sawyer opened the lid. Broken flange, he muttered. Maisie's hands trembled. I can't play without it. We'll shift to guitar, he offered. We've done it before. Not for this one, she whispered. Sawyer saw it in her eyes. The piano wasn't just keys and strings. It was safety, armor, a place to be brave while hiding. I'll fix it, he said. That night, by the flickering light of a lantern, Sawyer worked. Tweezers, glue, prayers whispered between breaths. His fingers ached, eyes burned, but he didn't stop. At dawn, he pressed the key. It sang, imperfect, but true. When Maisie touched the keys that morning, she didn't smile. She simply nodded as if saying, I know what you gave up to give this back to me. Then they played. To the girl in the back who won't raise her hand, the trio began, to the boy in the hall with silence like sand. Their harmonies fell together like puzzle pieces. Maisie's voice rose into the chorus. We were made for music, even if we never make a sound. We were made for more than fading. We were made to be found. Sawyer hit stop on the recorder. His heart thundered. He uploaded the file to a private link, typed the submission form. Under group name, he wrote the silent 3. And in the message box, we know we don't meet your rules, but we hope we meet your hearts. If there's room for 3 girls who learn to sing in the cracks of the world, then maybe this song is for you too. He hit submit. The next day, the rejection came, not from the jury, but from the grocery store. Sawyer was choosing apples when he heard a sneer behind him. Must be easy using pity to get on stage these days. Darryl Crane, banker, deacon, the kind of man who smiled like he was selling something soulless. "Excuse me," Sawyer said. Darryl shrugged. "A lot of folks think it's manipulative, parading around those poor twins and your situation. Some people work hard to earn the spotlight." Sawyer's jaw clenched. They did work hard, and they earned every second. Darryl leaned in. "Don't expect applause just because you brought a sad story with a melody." Sawyer didn't respond. He didn't have to. Some songs weren't meant for men like Darryl Crane. They were meant for girls still learning how to sing, and for the fathers who refused to let them fall silent. Outside, snow was beginning to melt, turning to slush on the sidewalks. The air was sharp and biting. March in Nebraska. The kind of season where everything aches before it blooms. The night lay still, wrapped in a hush broken only by the soft creak of Sawyer's footsteps as he moved down the hallway. In one hand he carried a weathered guitar, its wooden frame murmuring memories long buried. He crouched just outside Maisie's door, brushing the strings with a gentleness that made the darkness hum. A lullaby drifted forth, fragile and familiar, a song once lost to fire and grief. "I thought it was gone after the fire," he whispered, barely audible. "It was in the school's music closet," came Ellis's soft reply from behind. "I found it tucked away in an old case." The moment hung suspended in silence until a small figure appeared. Maisie, her curious eyes peeking into the hall. Sawyer offered her a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with time. She accepted it carefully, her fingers tracing each faded letter as if touching the edge of a dream. "Can we play it?" she asked quietly. He blinked, caught off guard. "You want to finish it?" Maisie nodded. "It already feels finished. I just want to hear it." They gathered in the living room, cushions scattered like islands on the floor. Sawyer sat cross-legged barefoot, the guitar nestled against his chest. The girls curled beside him, leaning in as if the music were a story waiting to unfold. The melody began gently, 2 chords rocking back and forth like a steady heartbeat. Then a lift, then a fall, slow and luminous, as though they were descending into light. Maisie sang the first note, soft, sure, glowing. Junie and Lyra joined by the second verse, their harmonies threading around hers like rivers merging. By the bridge, Sawyer's fingers moved freely, with a grace that suggested they had never stopped. What memory had forsaken, his soul retrieved. He glanced toward Ellis, who stood in the doorway, one hand covering her mouth. She wasn't crying, not quite, but she listened like someone who hadn't heard music in a very long time. Before dawn, Sawyer rose and stepped into the dew-covered yard, heading for the old shed tucked behind the house. It had once held the remnants of a life he thought he'd left behind. There, in a corner, sat the case. He opened it slowly, reverently. The guitar gleamed beneath a veil of dust, light mahogany, dulled strings still intact. He sat by the shed's small window, warm light pouring across his shoulder, and began to restore it, one string at a time. He tuned each note with care, polished the wood, oiled the fretboard. He even glued a fine crack near the bass, a quiet wound unnoticed until now. When he finished, he cradled it in his lap and ran a hand along its familiar curve. "Let's do this right this time," he whispered. That afternoon, he called the girls into the living room. The fireplace cast a golden glow, shadows dancing like old memories. With great care, he placed the newly restored guitar on its stand. "This," he said, "was the first guitar I ever owned. Your mother gave it to me when we got engaged." Maisie stepped forward, eyes wide. "It was the first thing that made me believe I could do something good with music," he continued, "and I think it's time we bring it back." "Is this for the next performance?" Junie asked softly. Sawyer shook his head. "No." Lyra frowned. "Then what's it for?" "It's for us," he said simply. "No stage, no judges, just a recording. Everything you've been working on, Maisie's originals, your harmonies, even that lullaby, we'll release it online, free, no labels, no gatekeepers." He paused. "If the world hears it, great, but if even one kid finds it and realizes their voice matters, that's enough." Maisie nodded. "It's more than enough." That weekend, the garage transformed into a sanctuary. Quilts muffled the walls, string lights draped across the rafters, a borrowed mixing board hummed quietly in the corner. They recorded everything. Mistakes, laughter, scribbled notes in the margins, harmonies whispered over mugs of cocoa. The final track was the lullaby. Once incomplete, now reborn in Maisie's voice, clear, confident, carried by the very guitar that had once sung her to sleep. When the music ended, no one spoke. Junie reached over and clicked the recorder off. Lyra rested her head against Maisie's shoulder. Sawyer looked at the guitar in his lap, then at Ellis, who had sat quietly through it all, offering tea, cookies, and something deeper. Hope. He whispered, "Welcome back." He didn't say who he meant. The girls, the music, his wife, himself, maybe all of them. Long after the house fell silent, Sawyer uploaded the album to a free streaming platform. The artist named The Silent Three. The album title, Songs for the Ones Who Listen. In the description he wrote, "For the ones told they were too quiet to matter, for the ones who waited to be heard. Here we are." By sunrise, the first comment appeared, then another. A school nurse from Ohio, a father in Vermont, a girl in Oregon who played the lullaby on repeat while sketching stars. The world was listening, and the guitar had come home. The first time Sawyer stepped into the Whitmore Civic Center in Lincoln, he felt like an intruder in someone else's life. Marble floors gleamed, soft jazz whispered from overhead, everything shimmered with a refinement he didn't recognize. His hands felt too rough, his past too jagged. Maisie clutched her lyric notebook like a shield. Junie and Lyra flanked her, both wide-eyed and quiet. They weren't on the performance roster, the district had made that clear, but a last-minute cancellation left a 10-minute gap in the youth showcase. Ellis, bold and unrelenting, had pushed until the director relented. One song, they said. No introduction, no announcement. It wasn't a slot, but it was a chance. And sometimes that's all that matters. Backstage, the girls waited on folding chairs, surrounded by the soft chaos of violin tuning, poetry recitations, and hurried lipstick checks. No one glanced their way. No one knew their names. And in that anonymity, there was strength. Sawyer tuned the guitar slowly. The strings shimmered under the lights. He looked at his daughter, then the twins. They've already won, he thought. They're here. But the girls weren't thinking about winning. They were thinking about the moment ahead, the 10 steps to the stage, the breath before the first note, the silence that might welcome them or swallow them whole. Maisie's hands trembled. "Cold?" Sawyer asked softly. She shook her head. "Just awake." He smiled. "Good. You're up," said the tech assistant. "Curtain in 30. No names, no fanfare. Just light and strangers." Junie stepped onto the stage first, heart pounding. Lyra followed, brushing her fingers along her sister's sleeve, a gesture from childhood. Maisie came last, no hesitation, no fear. She walked like the earth had agreed to carry her. Sawyer sat to the side. No mic, no amp, just strings and soul. The first note barely registered, Maisie's voice soft as breath, full of promise. Junie followed, lifting the melody with clear, unwavering tone. Lyra joined beneath, her warm alto grounding them. They didn't perform, they shared, and it worked. The room shifted. Chatter faded, phones lowered, people leaned in. The harmonies rose, 3 voices, 3 lives, woven into one. Sawyer played each note with care, pride radiating from his quiet posture. At the bridge, Maisie stepped forward. "We are not the echoes of someone else's sound," she sang. "We are the music no one saw coming, and we are still loud, even now." The final chorus didn't climb in pitch, it climbed in bravery, and when the last note dissolved into the hush, the silence that followed was reverent. Then came applause, a rising wave, then a roar. People stood, some wiped tears. A woman pressed a hand to her chest, mouthing "beautiful." A veteran nodded slowly. A teenager in a varsity jacket whispered, "Holy crap." Maisie looked to the crowd, then to her father. She didn't cry, she smiled. Backstage there was no frenzy, no press, no business cards. Just a quiet line of strangers saying thank you. That was my daughter's story. I hadn't felt that in years. A radio host asked for a copy. An arts coordinator invited them to sing for children with special needs. Sawyer said yes, to everything. Because now this wasn't just healing, it was giving. Later, as they walked through the cool evening that already felt like spring, Maisie led the way, hand in hand with Junie and Lyra. Sawyer and Ellis followed at a distance. "If she ever wants to study music," Ellis said quietly, "I know people, scholarships, mentors, places that won't just tolerate a quiet kid. They'll cherish her." "I'll let her decide," Sawyer replied, his heart full. "But thank you. She's already more than ready." At the truck, Sawyer loaded the guitar into the back. Maisie turned to him. Do they really hear us? He looked at her, not the girl who once hid in silence, but the young artist who had just given the world her voice. They felt you, he said. That's more than hearing. That's remembering. Maisie nodded. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. Tight, fierce, the kind of hug that carries years. In that moment, Sawyer Whitlock knew that music hadn't just saved his daughter, it had saved him. And the word that made it all possible wasn't music, wasn't love, wasn't even Dad. It was again, and it changed everything. The word hung in the air like a fragile thread of light. Sawyer blinked, unsure he'd heard her right. He turned toward her slowly, the neck of the guitar still cradled in his hand. What? Maisie sat up straighter, her posture unshaken now, eyes steady in the amber glow of the fire. Play it again, she said. There was no tremor in her voice this time, no retreat behind a shield of silence. It wasn't a whisper like before. It was a request. No, more than that. It was a desire, spoken with clarity, spoken with purpose. Sawyer's hand froze on the strings, not because she had spoken. She'd begun to speak more often in recent weeks, especially around Junie and Lyra. At first, just hushed murmurs. Little smiles tucked into quiet conversations, then laughter, unexpected and sweet. But this was different. This was her voice, full of life, of want. He swallowed hard, the emotion crawling up his throat like it wanted to sing too. Then, with a grin he couldn't quite contain, he nodded. Yes, ma'am. And he played it again. This time her voice joined his, not tentative but sure, a ribbon of melody winding through his chords. They sang together. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the fireplace glowed with the last of the embers, Maisie stood from the table. Her movement was quiet but certain. I want to record a message, she said. Junie looked up from her cup of tea, eyebrows knitting gently. For who? For everyone. Maisie didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. She just said, yes. Sawyer folded the dish towel slowly, his hands still damp. Okay, he said softly. They set up the recorder in the living room, just like they always did. The lights were dimmed low, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. The fire had gone from flame to coals, glowing like the quiet heart of the room. Maisie sat on the stool in the centre, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She drew in a long, deliberate breath, and then her voice met the silence. Hi, my name is Maisie Whitlock. I used to think silence was safer, that not talking meant not hurting. She paused for a beat, then continued, her tone steady, her words carrying weight like stones skipping across a still lake. But then someone sang near me. Not to me, near me. And I remembered what my mother's voice sounded like. I remembered that I used to sing too. So if you're listening to this and you're quiet like I was, I just want to say you're not broken, you're just waiting, and when you're ready, we'll hear you. She turned slightly, looking at her father. Sawyer's hand trembled as it hovered over the recorder, but he pressed the button. Stop. A tear slipped down his cheek as he whispered, perfect. That night they uploaded the message, attached it to their song recordings, just one more drop in the ocean of the internet. But by morning, it had surged into something none of them could have imagined. It began with a podcast host, someone who called the message the most important 90 seconds of the year. Then a non-profit in Chicago reached out asking if Maisie would speak virtually for their spring fundraiser. A university in Oregon requested permission to use the clip in their music therapy seminar. And the emails. They came in waves, from mothers of silent children, from grown adults who had only ever sung in their cars, from teenagers who wrote things like, I didn't cry until now, and I think I needed to. But the one that struck the deepest chord came from a girl named Avery in Montana. My mom passed away last year. I haven't spoken to anyone since, but I played your song for my dog. Then I sang it with him. I just wanted you to know, I think you helped me speak again too. Maisie printed that email and pinned it to her wall, right beside a photograph of her mother. When Sawyer saw her do it, he didn't say a word. He sat beside her and simply placed his hand over hers. In that moment, he wasn't a miracle worker. He was just a dad. And that, he realized, was more than enough. Later that week, the girls performed at the town library. It wasn't a grand venue, just a small crowd, neighbors mostly, a few curious souls who'd read the article or seen the video. No fanfare, no cameras, no applause born from pity, just people listening. At the end of the show, a small boy with a lisp asked shyly if they had a CD. Junie smiled and promised to mail him one. Lyra, with a heart as wide as her grin, handed him a little drawing, a treble clef with wings. Maisie bent down to his level and asked softly, "What's your favourite colour?" The boy's face lit up. "Green." Maisie smiled. "That's mine too." After the library performance, they began planning something bigger, a regional tour. Not of fancy concert halls, but of shelters, schools, rehab centres, any place where people were still learning to find their voices. Sawyer dubbed it the Echo Tour. Ellis offered to come along as a second driver and unofficial tour manager. Maisie called her the mom friend, and Ellis didn't even pretend to mind. One night by the fire, Sawyer turned to his daughter. "Maisie, do you ever want to write a song about your silence?" She sat with the question for a long time, watching the flames flicker and dance. Finally, she said no. He nodded, understanding. "Too painful?" Maisie shook her head. "No, just... I'm done being a silence. I want to be everything else now." Later that night, he opened his old lyric journal, the one that had stayed closed for years. Flipping past page after blank page, he finally found a clean sheet. And there, in neat handwriting, he wrote, April 12th. Maisie said again today, and I think the world began again too. The first stop of the Echo Tour was a humble community centre in Hastings. The walls were chipped with age, but the air smelled of old books and freshly brewed coffee. The folding chairs didn't match. The sound system was borrowed from the bingo hall next door. The crowd? A quiet mix of middle schoolers, veterans, single mothers, and two toddlers sitting cross-legged sharing a juice box. It was perfect. No pressure, no expectations, just stories waiting for permission to be told. Maisie stood on a makeshift stage beside Junie and Lyra, an old rug masking creaky boards beneath their feet. Sawyer sat just behind, the Taylor guitar resting like an old friend in his arms. When they played A Song for the Silent, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in the people. A mother in the second row closed her eyes and leaned back like the melody carried her. A teenager near the exit pulled his hoodie tighter but didn't leave. An old man in a wheelchair gripped the armrest and nodded with closed eyes, his lips silently mouthing every word. Even the toddlers stopped fidgeting. And when the final note faded into stillness, the applause wasn't loud. It was reverent. And somehow that felt louder than any stadium could. Afterward, people didn't rush forward to praise. They came quietly in pairs and trios, like pilgrims coming to leave small pieces of themselves. A man named Lou, a Vietnam vet, told Sawyer, "That one, with the slow bridge, it reminded me of the letters my wife used to write me. She's been gone 15 years. I don't usually cry, but today I did." A school counsellor asked for flyers to pass to kids struggling with bullying and grief, and one girl, barely taller than the mic stand, handed Maisie a wrinkled note. It read, "Sometimes I don't talk because people don't wait long enough, but I think you would." Maisie folded it gently, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "Always." They visited 7 towns over 2 weeks. Church basements, school lunchrooms, fire stations. The result was always the same. Stillness, then tears, then something like hope. Junie and Lyra learned how to calm pre-show jitters. They taught Sawyer awkward TikTok hand dances and made Ellis laugh so hard during rehearsal she knocked over a mic stand. But Maisie transformed. She began introducing the songs, talking, explaining. Her voice no longer a fragile thread, but a steady current, gentle, sure, powerful. One night, in a recovery centre for women, a woman who had said nothing the entire session stood and spoke. "I don't know who taught you to sing like that," she said, her voice rough with held-back years, "but whoever they were, they gave the world back to you, and you gave it to us." Maisie stepped off the stage and wrapped the woman in a hug. She whispered something only the woman heard. Later, the woman told Ellis, "That kid's the bravest thing I've ever seen." On a rainy night, the van rolled home beneath dark pines. The girls dozed in the back seat. Ellis stared out the window, the world a blur of wet glass. Sawyer kept his eyes forward, but his heart wandered. He'd thought the tour was for them, for the girls, for healing. He hadn't expected it would be for him, too. Every song, every story, it stitched something in him he hadn't realized was torn. He thought about his late wife, her laugh, her warmth, how she drew music out of him like sunlight draws bloom, and now Maisie was doing the same. When they returned home, 3 voicemails waited. One from a radio producer wanting to feature them, another from a Missouri school district hosting an anti-bullying summit, and one more from Caroline at the Whitmore Civic Center. She had been there that night, the woman crying in the third row. Now she worked for the state's cultural board. We'd like to invite the Silent Three to headline the Youth Voices Gala in June. No audition, no paperwork, just bring the music. We'll bring the spotlight. Sawyer read the message twice. Then again, he looked around, Maisie humming softly, Junie and Lyra planning their next set list. Ellis watching them all with that steady, knowing gaze. He tapped the phone, then smiled. That night, by the crackling fire, Maisie handed her dad a fresh sheet of paper. "I wrote a duet," she said, "for you and me." He scanned the lyrics. "I found my voice in the space between your silence." His eyes glistened. "Will you sing it with me?" Maisie didn't answer. She just picked up the guitar and strummed the first chord.